Hi, welcome to Reel Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. I'm pleased to have with me back on the show once again my good friend Sarah Evans. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Hi, Angela. Thanks for having me back. I always love being here with you.
Yeah, I love having you. And Sarah, as you know from previous episodes, is a fan of documentaries. And so she proposed the idea that we review the Oscar nominated documentaries. And I know it's after the Oscars, but those movies are still available for people to watch. And it tends to be a category not a lot of people see those movies. I feel like that and probably the shorts and maybe best, they don't call it foreign language film anymore. What do they call it? International feature are probably the ones people watch the least of. And of course, those are two of my favorite categories is international feature and documentary.
Yeah.
So in part because they tend to be some of the better nominees, better than the best picture nominees. And this is yet another year where I think there was a very strong documentary category. It's been increasingly one of the stronger categories at the Oscars. We're reviewing four of the five because one of them we couldn't access, which was Black Box Diaries, which I still really do want to see, but neither of us have a subscription to that particular streaming service, and it didn't show in theaters here, so we missed out on it. But so we're calling it critically acclaimed documentaries, which is also true. These were all critically acclaimed, but they were also all nominated for best for an Oscar. And we're going to start off with the film that actually won the Oscar for Best Documentary, No Other Land. It was made by a Palestinian-Israeli film collective of forum activists and what they describe as an act of resistance on the path to justice. So the film was recorded primarily by Basel, Adra, and Yuval Abraham, boy, I'm butchering names, between 2019 and 2023, and it shows the destruction of Basel's hometown or home area of Nasar Yatta. It's a region in the occupied West Bank that he's lived in since he was a child, and his family and many other families in that area went back for generations, including going back to the 1800s. Some of those homes were there. And the Israeli government decides they want the land for a military training zone for tanks. So they take it over. I mean, there are court maneuvers and things, but since the courts are also Israeli, the Palestinians lose in court. And the film, he literally documents the destruction of homes, of generators, of their cars. Their cars are taken away from them because they can't drive through the area anymore, even though they live there. And many of the people take to living outside or living in caves in the area. The reason this film got a lot of attention for multiple reasons. One is it's Palestinian. Second of all, it to this day, as of March of 2025, has no distribution because no film studio was willing to distribute it. So it's one of, in my mind, one of the only films to ever win an Oscar that also has no distribution. Despite that, it did show in theaters. It showed at film festivals, which is where it started getting buzz. And luckily, we got to see it here in our a local city here in Salem. It showed at our local theater. So I'm curious to hear what you thought of the movie, Sarah.
Where do I start? Um, just all politics aside, this was an incredibly made film. The storytelling was just so phenomenal. The really personal firsthand glimpses you got of what was happening to people were amazing. Um, there were a lot of really beautiful shots, just making use of the landscape
Mhm.
and just everything about it. I just thought it was really, really well made and a fascinating story, regardless of the politics. But like that aside, I'm not surprised. I'm really upset, but not surprised that no film distributor has picked it up. It's I think this is a complicated film. I think everybody should see this film because it absolutely shows you firsthand through personal people's stories the atrocities that Israel is doing to the Palestinians And these things are not covered by the media, which is why the filmmakers chose to make the film in the first place. And I mean, you can't watch this film and not feel just really strong feelings about what Israel's doing. You
Yeah.
cannot, it's like you cannot watch and not be just heartbroken seeing these people losing their homes for no reason other than just one country's genocide. I'm not afraid to say the word genocide about it. Um, the other thing I want to say though that I found interesting was that I was so glad the film won the Oscar because it did at least get some more attention. And when I went and saw it at Salem Cinema, it was completely full the week
Hmm.
after it
I
won.
know.
So I was glad about that. Although it didn't stay after that week, unfortunately. Um, but there's also, I just want to throw out there, there's been some interesting criticism of the film, mainly surrounding so it was a Palestinian and an Israeli director who made it together. And there's been some criticism of, the Israeli director's speech at the Oscars, um, and it potentially continuing to subtly support the idea that Palestinians don't have the right to live there.
Mm.
So I'm just going to throw it out there that I don't even want to go into depth of that, but like I recommend everybody watch this film. And I also recommend go just Google critiques of it just because it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I had not heard those critiques. I watched the Oscars and I saw his speech and I didn't see anything wrong with it, but I'm also just an ignorant American. Um, um, I am pro-Jewish, I will say that. And so in terms of like, I love Jewish culture. I love, my favorite film of last year was A Real Pain, which is a movie about the Jewish experience, right? And
It's a
what
great
happened to
movie.
them in the Holocaust. Yeah. So I felt like his perspective was really good to have in the movie because he is an ally, he's sympathetic, but he also has privilege, right? And he recognizes that, but to a certain extent, but I think that Basel having to constantly kind of point out to him, hey, you can leave here anytime. You can drive wherever you want. And
Mhm.
you have this privilege. Like, I can't leave this area. I am told I have to stay here. And so, like, the freedom to just move around and drive where you want is something that the Palestinian director does not have. And so he's constantly pointing that out to the Israeli
Mhm.
director throughout the film. Flip side, some of the footage they get is because they get into the Israeli filmmaker's car and he's able to take them places and do things.
Yeah.
And him being an ally is important, right? And he's
Mhm.
treated really poorly by like the Israeli soldiers who call him a traitor for helping out the Palestinians. And so it's really complicated, like you said. And their friendship, I think, is important to the film and why the film is successful, I think, as a narrative, because we see them develop this friendship despite their, differences. And it also highlights the differences, right? So, but there is no way that you can. I mean, I just can't imagine anyone who watched this. I don't know how sympathetic you might be to the Israeli government and see the scenes of, for instance, the school being torn down. The kids are in school and they make them move out, and the kids watch as their school is demolished, the only school in their area, and they're not given an alternative school to go to, or they're not. There's no sense of anything other than, well, you just don't get to go to school now. You're persona non grata. We don't care what happens to you. Another scene that really got to me was the scene where they start destroying the generator that they're using to live, to have outside, just so they can have power outside. They destroy the generator, and there's this woman like fighting with the soldier over a generator. These are not people, because there's so many images in the media of Hamas, right? And then we think of the terrorist side of it. These are just regular poor people who want to just live. That's all they want to do. They're not terrorists. They're not sympathetic to that. They just want their generator so they can have some power, so they can cook their food, and so the kid can play, games on their cell phone. Like, that's all they want. It's not like, and that's what people need to see. And unfortunately, this movie, the type of people that will see it are people like you and me, and not the people that probably need to see it, which is always the problem with like political documentaries, I realize. But
Unfortunately, yeah. But like I said, I am glad that it got the Oscar and honestly that it continues to get attention around not getting distribution because at a minimum it's keeping the subject higher profile in people's
true.
minds. And I mean, again, not surprised, but still it still doesn't have distribution even after winning the Oscar.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
just
I thought after it
pathetic.
was nominated, it would get distribution because it got nominated, 2 months before the actual awards. And I thought, oh, now I'll get distribution. Surely some small company, because I didn't think, okay, I get it. I get it that the big guns, the Universals and the Warner Bros., they're not going to take a chance on that. But really, a small indie company isn't going to
Hmm.
go, oh, we'll pick it up. No, still no. So, and then it won, and then it still didn't get distribution. So it's been just being shown by theaters picking it up, and I don't know what will happen in terms of streaming, if it will get a streaming release. I would imagine if it does, it will be on a smaller service like a Criterion or a Movie, maybe Canopy because it's through the library service, but it won't be on your Netflixes or your Maxes, I don't think. So
Yeah,
anyway, a great film. I recommend it. Hard to
same.
watch, hard to watch. I will just put that out there. It is not cheerful. It
Hmm.
is very hard to watch, and it should be because what's happening to regular people, women and children, is devastating. So, um,
Agreed. All of the movies we're reviewing today are hard to
I
watch
know.
for different
I know. There was no
reasons.
happy docs this year. There's none of those ones like the singing seniors that get up and dance and sing.
Mm-mm-mm.
I can't remember which one that was years ago, but all really important ones. So let's
For
move on
sure,
to the
for
next
sure.
one.
Yeah, for sure. So the next film we're going to talk about is called Sugarcane. And this was briefly at Salem Cinema. It's no longer there, unfortunately. But this is directed by Julian Brave NoiseCat and Emily Kassie. And Julian is actually telling the story of his own family and other families in Canada, indigenous families, and who are still today dealing with the traumas of forced boarding schools and the ways that uh, indigenous children were abused, both physically and sexually, in these boarding schools, and how that trauma still impacts these families today. This film took place in Canada, but it 100% is what happened in America too.
Yeah,
And this is another story that hasn't been told enough and needs to be told more. And I feel like the traumatic legacy of these Indian boarding schools is finally starting to get a little bit more attention in the media, but not enough. And I think what was really impactful about this film in particular, well, not only bringing to light more of the exact types of abuse that happen there, but that generational trauma that is attached to it. Julian, his his um his grandparents and father
hmm
both were part of these schools, and seeing the continued impacts that's had today, even on his own relationship with them as a
hmm
result, is just so powerful and sad. I mean, what else can you say? But I think that term generational trauma, I think, is sometimes one that gets thrown around when people are talking about racism or white supremacy or DEI related things, but I don't know if people always really recognize exactly what that means. And I think this film really shows you what that means. So what
sure.
do you think?
Yeah, I really liked this one too. It's a different style. Emily, it's National Geographic. So the Emily Cassie is an investigative journalist, so she brings that lens. But I loved that Julian Noiscat and his family, and that the indigenous filmmaker perspective was in there. And I feel like that's reflected in the movie in a lot of the quiet moments or the decisions to not show certain things. Like there's a part where Julian Noiscat and his father go to have a conversation with the grandma over what really happened with the father's birth because there's this mystery. Um, and instead of showing the conversation, it takes place off camera, but we hear the audio while we're looking at beautiful scenery of the land they live on. And to me, that felt very appropriate. It was one of my favorite scenes actually in the movie. There's lots of scenes of nature and their connection to the land, and I think that's very important. And at one point, they sing a song about Canada is our land, Canada is Indigenous land. And you're right, it's also applicable to the US. In fact, at the end of the movie, they say there was like maybe 100 such of these type of boarding schools in the Canada. There was more than 300 in the US. The particular one they're looking at was ran by the Catholic Church, and the atrocities committed there are beyond what I expected. And I am a former Catholic who has seen a lot of movies about the Catholic Church and the atrocities they've committed to young people. I've seen the movie Spotlight, I've seen many of the documentaries about the victims of the Catholic Church, and I was not prepared for what happened in this movie
Same.
because there is something beyond sexual assault. And I'm trying to figure out if I should even say it.
I don't
I
know.
don't think
Yeah.
I should, but there's something that happens beyond a sexual assault that happened a lot. Um, and it was atrocious. Even now I can't even talk about it. That was
It's
happening.
murder. It's straight up murder.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so murder was happening on a somewhat regular basis, and I had a really hard time processing that. I'll be honest, and that fact they proved it, and the fact that there's, of course, because this is years after the school is closed, there's no one to be held responsible. There's no justice that's going to really happen here. But what I think the movie's trying to get at is that the healing has to happen because otherwise this will just continue. The father talks about he had to leave the reservation, right? Because he just couldn't deal with the trauma. He was a drunk, all of these things happened. And who wouldn't drink if you had gone to that school and witnessed those things and had those things happen to you? I mean, honestly, like,
Hmm.
I wanted to have a drink after watching this movie, so I could only imagine
Yeah.
if you actually lived it. And so these things reverberate throughout their communities and cause
Hmm.
generational trauma, and that's what they're trying to heal by just bringing it out in the open. It's not even about at this point getting justice per se because there's no way to do that. It's about trying to heal the community by at least getting people to acknowledge that this happened. So they go to the Vatican at one point and the Pope does apologize, but it's very unsatisfying. It's not what they really, it's something they wanted to do and they were hoping to get an apology and they did because they didn't even know going in that they were going to get an apology, but it feels unsatisfying because how can you just say I'm sorry for something like that, for killing people and for hurting people for generations like that? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
I hate to have to move on to the next film,
Well,
but
we need to go
we
though.
do. But
So another
highly
great
rec
one. Four
highly
stars for
recommend.
both of these films. Yeah. So we'll
That
move
one's
on.
easy to find too. It's on National Geographic, so if you have like Disney Plus, you can watch it, and I
Disney
highly
or
recommend.
Hulu. I watched it on Hulu, so you can watch it on either of those. Yeah. Definitely important film to watch. Yeah.
So the next film we're going to talk about is Porcelain War, directed by Brendan Bellomo and Slava Leontyev. And this one is about the Ukraine, the Russian attack on Ukraine. Again, another exciting, not uplifting. Although I will say, I was kind of comparing this film mentally to No Other Land, since they're both very important wars happening right now that are in our public consciousness. And I did think this film felt a little more hopeful than the other. It involves in particular they're following like there's a couple who are artists and make these beautiful porcelain figurines. And then when the war happens, kind of what happens with them and how the husband has to jump into basically becoming a trained militia person to try to defend his home. And he's even working with and training others who have this little small militia of folks. And what really got me about that in particular was that these are just regular people who have been forced into this situation of having to protect their homes with weapons. I
Hmm.
mean, like there's this one little scene where he's introducing the people in his little militia and they're like, "Oh yeah, an IT tech and I'm a graphic designer and I'm a dairy farmer." And they're just like
Yeah.
normal people who would never even maybe pick up a gun, and now they're having to get military training to defend their homes from the Russian invasion. And it's just heartbreaking to see. And but also like again, I thought really powerful storytelling, like right in there. So you see the real impacts on the Ukrainian families who are having to go through this. And I also this was probably my second favorite after No Other Land of
Hmm.
the ones we watched. And I think more than ever, it's important to watch it right now, given the way our current administration has been treating Ukraine and Zelensky, and that's just such an embarrassment for and just horrible. So we need to be reminded that Ukraine is not they're not Russia's not a victim here. It's Ukraine. And so this is another one I think everybody needs to see.
Hmm. This is actually it's interesting. Yeah, it's like my least favorite of the four films,
Oh wow.
and mainly and not because of the subject matter. I think I've actually seen a few documentaries about the war in Ukraine that I thought have been better. My issue with this one was the style it was made, and the fact that it was like, oh, we're artists, and now we're in the military. Now we're taking up arms, which like, okay, yeah, I get that, but the style of it, I really had a hard time with. I didn't, it didn't draw me in, and I
Hmm.
didn't get drawn into the characters or the characters, the people,
The
the
people.
artists. Yeah, the main couple as much as I
Mhm.
thought I would be. I saw this at Sundance, not
Mhm.
this year, a year ago. So it was out a while ago. It showed at Sundance 2024. So that's January 2024. And then another one that I did get distribution, but very limited, and I think is very hard to find. I'm not even sure it's on streaming right now. I
It's
think you
not.
saw it at Salem Cinema, and they were showing all the Oscar nominated docs, or most of them. They didn't show Black Box. But so again, though, I think there's some other documentaries out there that, of course, now I don't have them on the top of my head that about Ukraine that I think are better. And I guess I was comparing it to those. So I think that's one of the issues.
Mm.
But it's interesting to hear your perspective of it, though. It made me think, oh, I should rewatch it maybe. So, although
Well,
it's also
that
really hard to rewatch these
I
things.
know. Well, it is, I do think it's also interesting to think that you said you saw it like a year ago, and I saw it like
A couple of weeks.
a week
Yeah,
after Trump completely humiliate tried to humiliate Zelensky in front of the world.
right.
And so it's kind of I was already kind of amped up like
Right. So for you,
this
it was
we have
like,
to
yeah.
stop forgetting that this is a problem. And so I think it maybe almost made a difference in how I ended up reacting to the film given the current context versus maybe
I
when
could
it came
totally
out.
see that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And also, hopefully, it will get picked up on streaming since it was a documentary that's nominated for an Oscar. But again, as we said with No Other Land, there was no, there's no
Yeah.
guarantee of that. So I think
Yeah. I
that's,
hope it does. Because I also honestly felt a little bit with what's going on within our own country, I also felt like real fear that what they're doing could be us and
yeah, I
not
mean,
too far in the
at the
future.
scary, yeah, I mean, it definitely makes you think about those things. Like if people are feeling threatened and they feel like they have to take up arms to defend their home or their livelihoods or their families. I mean, those are the things that are happening in that movie for sure. So yeah, we'll move on to our next one, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So that's a four-star movie for you, it sounds like then as well.
Yes.
Was Sugarcane 4 stars or more like three and a half maybe, or
The first three films I would give them all
four
that we
stars?
talked
Yeah.
about, I would give them all four
Okay.
stars.
So our next one is soundtrack to a coup d'etat, and it's probably the most difficult, challenging of the documentaries from a format standpoint. It is a film that links what happened to the Belgian Congo in 1960s, early 1960s, 1960 and 61, with what was happening in the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, and specifically jazz musicians. And I think what's interesting about this movie is the director has an experimental art background, and that definitely comes out in the way this movie is told. He is a multimedia artist, and so it is not a traditional talk. It is not a traditional documentary in any way, and it's not a traditional talking head type documentary. It's 2.5 hours, and it feels like a deep dive into history. In fact, I would almost call this more of like a video essay than a film,
Hmm.
because it uses a lot of newspaper clippings and quotes and things that you don't normally see in documentaries, and a lot of amazing footage of fantastic black jazz artists and very famous ones from the U.S., reaching from Dizzy Gillespie, Duke Ellington, Nina Simone, Melba Liston, John Coltrane, the list goes on. So it's also a good primer if you don't know much about American jazz music, because it's all the greatest, some of the greatest jazz musicians of all time. And of course, jazz is a type of music that was developed and founded by African American artists. And so this is very important because what happens in the Congo in the early 1960s is Africa was in the process of decolonizing, throwing out the colonizers. And the Congo is in the middle of the continent and is an important resource. They had more resources, still to this day, more mineral resources in the Congo than any place else in the world. The uranium powers nuclear power plants, and nuclear bombs, as well as those great little devices we have in our hands all the time, cell phones, and all these resources, diamonds, gold that come out of the Congo. And Congo decides we want to be independent. We don't want to be under Belgian rule anymore. And at the UN, everyone's kind of like on board with this in theory, but the US and the country of Belgium conspire behind the scenes to get rid of the freely elected democratic leader of the Congo, Lumumba. And this sparks much outrage by Black artists in the US who are still facing segregation in their own land. That is a long description because it is a very complicated movie, and I apologize for that, but I have to bring. I feel like this movie was kind of made for me because I'm a history buff, but I feel
Mm.
like if you're not a history buff, this movie is going to be very difficult. And I'm also married to a jazz musician and music theorist and composer, so that also helped my knowledge that I already know who a lot of these artists are. So I'm probably the audience for this movie, and maybe not more than me. So I'm curious what you thought, because I was picturing as I was watching this, you sitting in the theater and going, "Oh my God, what is happening?" Because it's very, very complex.
Well, you're not far off. I was like, yeah, there was a guy in the showing that I went to who left after 20 minutes and didn't come back, if that says anything.
Yeah.
It's definitely style-wise, the explanation you gave of who the filmmaker is, that makes a lot more sense to me now. It's not the style of film, though, that normally I really connect with. So while the information and story in this I thought were really important, I didn't connect with the film at all
Mm,
because honestly, because of the style it was told. It was hard to follow. It didn't feel like it felt like a lot of information being thrown at you in artistic pieces, but where I struggled to kind of get the whole story.
mhm.
And often they weren't presented enough for me to understand what was happening.
Yeah.
So I think what I came out of the film more was more wanting to know more about the story in ways that I didn't get from the film,
Mm,
because I definitely thought it was a fascinating time period and subject matter that I didn't know a lot about. But I felt like I didn't get a complete enough
yeah.
understanding from this film just because of the way it was told.
Well, the good thing is
Um,
it's all notated, so you can go back and read some of the books that they mentioned in the
that's
movie, right? So,
true.
but
That's
I will
true.
say it's very important that people understand that essentially the US CIA helped assassinate a democratically elected leader, which has been proven, because we wanted the uranium. I mean, and because of communism. That was part of it, but it wasn't just political because there was this battle with Khrushchev, but it was also because the US wanted these resources and a free people, a free Africa, they would have been able to keep their own resources. And Belgium and the US did not want that to happen. And so that's really one of the upshots. I also want to mention the great performance by Abby Lincoln and Max Roach really fast, because Abby Lincoln helped them lead a thing where they went into the UN Assembly and demonstrated, and that was very
Yeah.
important. And her performance of this Freedom Suite is interwoven throughout the film. And these were big names in jazz music at the time. So I think seeing what was happening to Black people in the US, and then of course seeing what was happening to Africans, is the reason to watch this movie. I really liked it, but I think I was the audience for it. So
Well, I think it's a good pairing with the others in that it's an
important,
example of historically what our country has done to other
right?
countries, and then um,
Continues
uh,
to do,
what
because
we're
we still
still
don't have
doing
a free
today.
Congo. We still don't have a free Congo today, and many parts of Africa are still struggling with the repercussions of colonialism. So we have to wrap up. We're way over. Brad's going to have to cut way down. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you as always. Have a great day and great movies. Goodbye.